Hello, everyone. All right, so let me just put the mic on. So tonight we're going to talk about the Supreme Court a little bit, their power to use interpretation when making decisions, and I'm going to answer questions. It seems like I have a lot of people that lurk out and watch the videos more than I realized, but they don't say anything for whatever reason, not in the chat. So I've been getting sent a lot of questions. So the thing about the Supreme Court is, and why I say they can't interpret, is because in the Constitution it doesn't give them the power to do that. And what I mean by that is what they're supposed to do is look at a law, a bill that's been passed into law or for law by Congress, and they're supposed to decide if it passed constitutionality. A lot of people would say that means they get to interpret, but they don't. I've just had this argument with a lot of lawyers and academic type on the Convention of States broadcast, and then afterwards on my own. And the thing about it is it can be confusing in the wording, but it really matters. And the reason why this came up more this time is because I brought it up in the last feed. So let me just, I'm going to go on here real quick while we're talking. I'm going to find the conversation with me and a lawyer that's actually a lawyer who speaks before the Supreme Court. Because it's a really important subject. I think it's fundamental in understanding it, at least in America, the powers that the Supreme Court have, what they can and can't control. And so my comment there was the Supreme Court is not the final arbiters of law and does not have the power to interpret. What the final arbiters of law means in legal speak is that you're the body that gets the absolute final say, and whatever you say becomes the law. All right, and this is important to understand. It's an important concept to understand because only Congress has the ability to write law. Only Congress has the ability to create law. So if you say that the Supreme Court can make a decision and that decision produces a law that has a different outcome than what it did before, then you've actually said they've created law. And that's what interpretation, I mentioned this in my last video, and that's what interpretation means in law, is it means change. That's all it can mean. Okay, so I got a lot of responses back, and I don't really want to get into sort of mention other people's names, but this is an actual lawyer, constitutional lawyer, says they are not the final arbiters of the law if the law is the Constitution. Okay. And what he means by that is that if the law they're dealing with is the Constitution itself, then they don't get to decide. Even in that, even that statement's wrong because the Constitution is not a law; it's a contract. It's a contract between the people of the United States and the government, and it's unique in the fact that our Constitution restricts what the government can do, as opposed to granting them what they can do. So, in other words, it lays out their powers, which does in fact tell them what they can do, but it restricts what they can do in terms of toward the citizens. So, for example, they can't restrict your rights on anything that's in the Bill of Rights. All right, so the Supreme Court doesn't actually deal with the Constitution at all. That's the truth. They only deal with the consequences of what happens as a result of the Constitution. So, anyways, he goes on to say they can rule it is unconstitutional. He's talking about a law. He's trying to pass a bill. He says, but they can't write law like something. And this is kind of the point I'm making. So he says they have the power to write and change the law but not in the present. All right, so this is where he thinks, this is where constitutional scholars arguing that they can change law that presently exists for future interpretations or future references. And that's just not true. Okay, so what I did in this conversation was I gave an example of how that works, right? And so I said that their job is to rule if laws are constitutional. That is based on the plain text of the Constitution. If the wording is ambiguous, then the decision automatically favors the citizen. And that's important to understand. So if you read the Constitution, I mentioned this in the last live feed, if you read the Constitution and you don't understand something, as a citizen, you just assume you have that right. Period. So, if something looks like you might have that right, but there might be something contradicting, you can't understand it, legally you have that right. Now, that doesn't mean that if you just completely don't understand the document, that suddenly a bunch of rights are created. What it does mean is that if somebody in Congress is reading that Constitution, and the thing about it is all congressmen should be well-versed in the Constitution. It's disturbing to me the pattern of people who are elected that don't even understand basic constitutional principles. They don't even know what the amendments are. But anyways, say you're a congressman and you're trying to write a law, or maybe you're challenging something that's happened before, and you look at the Constitution and you try to look at, sort of lawyers, what they do with contracts and law, any legal documents, they look for things that are unclear. And then they try to play games with words. That's really all lawyers do. So, that's the perspective I answered this lawyer. And I said, for example, if someone says, what kind of guns are legal? And they're talking about the Second Amendment. So the only answer the Supreme Court can give is all kinds, since it's unclear. And what I mean by that is it says you have the right to bear arms, but it doesn't say what kind of arms. Well, from a Supreme Court justice perspective, if we follow what contract law has always done, then what that means is it means all guns, right? You can't limit. You don't get to pick and choose, because the amendment itself didn't pick and choose, and it was intentional. Right? People say that the founding fathers didn't word it clearly. They worded it exactly like it needed to be worded. They reversed it so that this wouldn't happen, so it wouldn't matter. Okay. So anyways, I said, that is not interpretation, talking about saying that all guns are legal. And so that's yielding to ambiguity. It does not create law, it preserves law. And that's the contract, that's the foundation of the way our legal system is built, right? So if the contract's unclear, you just yield to ambiguity and you side with the person that could suffer, which in this happens to be the citizens. And that preserves the legal system. Okay, that just means you don't have to create a new circumstance every time. And this is what our courts get into these days. Okay, now I'm going to give you an example of what interpretation would be, and you can see the difference. All right, and so it says, same question, what kinds of guns are legal under the Second Amendment? And the Supreme Court comes back and says, we believe based on the founders' intentions and reasonable doubt that fully automatic weapons should be banned. This was an actual comment by a Supreme Court justice of the United States. That is a clear case of interpretation, and they do not have the power to do that. And the reason I say that is because, for one, he doesn't know the founders' intentions. We can read through, all kinds of documents, their quotes, things they've written, the Federation, the Federalist Papers, but we actually don't know. And what's more important is it actually doesn't matter. What they've done here is they extended law. They've created law. Now they have created a situation where if that decision is allowed to stand by the American people, now fully automatic weapons are illegal. Well, guess what? They don't have the power to do that, so they're not illegal. And this is the same thing I mentioned last time. It goes for abortion. They didn't have a legal right. Well, let's forget abortion for a second. Right? Let's talk about marriage. They don't have a right to rule on that period because it's not in the Constitution. Right? It's not a right. They can't create law, and so you don't have to obey that. And so this is why I was on the Convention of the States If you don't know what it is, you check it out. I do and do not support them both at the same time. There's things that they say that are just blatantly untrue when it comes to a convention. And I kind of feel like I'm going to do a different video about that. But despite the fact that they try to push their agenda, what they want, with a promotion type that includes lies, what they're actually trying to achieve is a good thing. And I think that probably all the states would support it. So their fundamental, I mean, I've got their handbook here. Let's see if I can. Their fundamental push is for, sorry, I'm trying to read it, is for both term limits on Congress and a balanced budget amendment. And then there's one other, it's a lot more vague. Let's try to find it real quick. I don't want to misspeak on it. But anyways, let's just stick with the two main ones, right? So they're trying to do a balanced budget amendment, and they're trying to do term limits amendment. I think term limits is easy. I don't think any state will vote against that. So I think that could be ratified simple. I don't think it would solve anything. If nothing else, it would actually speed the rate of corruption and make it more difficult to fight, because associations would constantly be changing and they're fairly complex. But whatever. I mean, people don't want to see people in there for 40 years. Who am I to, say what the public does or doesn't do? I mean, that's fine. It's whatever. So I don't really have much feelings on that. The second one's dangerous. And the fact that it intentionally doesn't go into detail about how you would limit the economy. And so I often say this, right, is that our future, the way things are going right now, and this is part of the reason why I started trying to apply lateralism to our society. The way things are going right now, we only have two things in our future, well, possibly three, but it's a combination of the other two, is we're going to have a convention of states, a constitutional convention, as a lot of people call them, Article 5, whatever. And that convention will change and delay, or possibly, alter the way our government works in a way so that we find some sort of peace, which I think is highly unlikely. Or we will have a civil war, or at least a civil conflict, large scale. But I think most likely we'll end up having both. I think that we'll have a convention that'll lead directly into a conflict. And I bring that up because if they were to get what they want on face value, right? Historically, what causes a conflict or a war or anything else, is civil or it doesn't make any difference, is when two parties are not at resolution on something. And then one way or another, one of the parties gains the ability to silence the other. That guarantees that the silence party will pick up weapons. So what's happened, and it'll always happen in the future. And so I feel like as the cause of they call it Convention of States project is pushing it, if the second agenda on their list was to come to be fulfilled, and now there was an amendment that says there had to be a balanced budget. Well, what's going to happen in that situation is one side of Congress is going to push to downsize or eliminate the military, because that's always their go-to. And then the other side is going to push to end all social or welfare programs, because that's generally their go-to. And what would happen is there'd be a stalemate. And in the event of a stalemate, whichever one had the upper hand as far as the Supreme Court goes, the unelected agencies, public opinion, what have you, they would gain the ability to silence the other. That's what would happen. And this is what happened in the original Civil War. This is how it started. And so one or the other would get silenced, and they would immediately go to arming themselves. So why I say that, when the first Civil War happened, You can talk about slavery all you want, but slavery was just a catalyst between the rich elitist. The reality is less than 3% of people alive owned or were associated with slavery, and less than 7% of black people alive have actual known heritage or ties to slavery. So the reality is almost none of us have any relationship with slavery in the past. Well, even though slavery was part of society, there wasn't a lot of people in society that had a lot of ties with it either. I mean, they obviously, when I say ties in this case, they saw it all the time. I mean, there might have only been one slaveholder in a county, but you can bet that slaveholder was the dominant market player in that economy, in that local economy, because they had free labor. So yes, everyone was affected by it. Everyone knew about it. They didn't do anything about it legally. So I'm not saying there's no guilt and there's no slavery, and I'm not saying any of this sort of thing. I don't believe in cultural guilt, but I think there was guilt at the time. But I also understand where they were at in the situation. It's not like they had the power to change it. So what I'm saying is, when the Civil War broke out, it wasn't like the whole South was just, I want slavery, I'm protecting. No, they weren't protecting slavery. They were protecting themselves from Northern troops, from federal troops. And so the average person back then just actually didn't care one way or the other about slavery. And that sounds terrible in a modern context, but you have to realize slavery had always been a thing. And so the whole abolitionist movement and this sort of ideas were new. And a lot of people just, they weren't involved in this sort of a conversation at all. I mean, it's not like they had a lot of books and things, and they had a really good education, but there was no social issue. Social justice just wasn't a thing at that time. Not like it is now. And so what I'm saying is when the Civil War, the reason why the Civil War happened is because there was a series of federal actions where laws were passed and they were allowed to stand by the Supreme Court, who felt this because they believed in the power of interpretation. And when the states used a legal mechanism called nullification, the Supreme Court also illegally shot that down. And now the reason why I say illegally is because in a republic, which is what the United States is, all partners are equal partners. So Texas and California are equals. They're also equals to Rhode Island. The size, population, none of these things matter. That's why we have electoral college as well. And the Supreme Court justice is just part of the federal government, and they're just a single partner. And so, unless it's a dispute between two states, the Supreme Court justice does not have the power to overrule. So if it's just one single state trying to nullify federal law that they believe is unconstitutional, then the Supreme Court justice does not have the power to overrule them and say, we said it's constitutional, you have to accept it. That's actually not a power they have. Now, that one is a little bit debatable, but it was intended to work that way. So what's supposed to happen when this comes up is let's say Texas doesn't like a law, and the Supreme Court justice says that's tough, that's the way it is, that's what the law says. Texas says, no, it's not. It's not the way the Constitution works, and we're not going to uphold it. No, actually, we can use North Carolina as a better example, but we can stick with Texas. So let's say same-sex marriage law is challenged in the Supreme Court, and it's upheld by the Supreme Court. Now, which it really happened. Okay, let's just forget for a minute here, all the sort of discussion, the political ramifications. This is just a hypothetical scenario, right? But then say Texas says, well, you don't have the constitutional right to make that ruling to the Supreme Court justice, which they'd be correct. And says, so we're going to nullify your decision, and in the state of Texas, it's still going to be illegal. So in this situation, if they did that, right, the Supreme Court justice would then come back and say, no, it is unconstitutional and you're going to obey us, right? So now we have a stalemate. And in this situation, the Supreme Court justice is actually in the wrong and Texas is in the right. I don't mean morally, but legally. So this is nullification. So what should happen in this situation is not the Supreme Court justice coming back and saying you'll take it anyways, because what this means is now they have to use force against Texas, right? Now, what the federal government has done and what we've allowed is that the federal government is so grossly overextended its actual legal parameters that they have financial ties into everything. And so in this case, they could just threaten Texas with money, right? Well, as I pointed out before, the federal government doesn't have money, right? Anything they have comes from the taxpayer. So there's no way the federal government should be able to threaten any state with withholding money because it's not their money to begin with. But that's what actually happened. So there's a whole long line of problems with the Supreme Court justice for me. And this is just one of them. So what should happen, I know I said this like 3 times, what should happen is 2 states or more would then side and raise the issue before the Supreme Court. And this has never been done. So what should happen in this situation is like California and Washington should come together and say, Texas is wrong. This is constitutional. And they should present and they should have a convention, a single item convention to debate and mediate the situation. It shouldn't be to the Supreme Court. And that's why Article 5 exists, and that's what the Convention of States is about. And this used to actually happen. People just don't know it. Right? In a situation where it cannot be resolved, then the Supreme Court has no founding, they have no basis to decide for anyone. They do not have the power to use that force against someone. So what would happen in that situation legally is that it would just fall under the 10th Amendment. And the states would have states' right and they would do what they want. That's what should happen. That's what actually should happen with same-sex marriage. If it is a clearly defined right, such as the right to own guns, then Texas doesn't really have any options. You know, I mean, they would have to concede that what they were doing violates the Constitution. But that's not the case. You know, I mean, it's ambiguous. You know, it's not actually clear if same-sex marriage is covered in the Constitution or not. In my opinion, it is clear. It's not covered, but because it's not an enumerated right, we'll say it's up for debate. Right? Well, then it becomes a state's issue for them to decide. Now, it's ironic that we bring up the Supreme Court and issues that are decided by the state because it goes both ways. The Second Amendment is a perfect example. The Second Amendment says you can't restrict guns in any way. What that means is, what it means is the entire United States constitutionally is under what we call constitutional carry, which means you can carry a gun concealed or in open anywhere you want, anytime you want, and you don't need a reason. You don't need a permit. You don't need to ask permission. It doesn't matter what kind of gun. You just simply can carry it, and it's used for self-defense, which means you can't create laws that also make it basically a crime to pull the weapon out as a method of, mediating the situation. And this is real important because you'll find that all over the United States, there are cities, entire areas that have actually banned guns, all guns. That is a constitutional right infraction. And the Supreme Court has done nothing about it. All right, this comes into the question of their actual job. This is when they can make a ruling on a state law. If it is a clear violation of an enumerated right, then the Supreme Court justice has a duty to seek out that problem and rectify it. You don't have to wait for someone to come to them. They can proactively look for the situation and make an observation, make a statement that it's illegal and have it challenged. They don't do that. But they only don't do that one way. And this is what I was talking about when I talked about everything always shifts. Every compromise shifts all political systems to the left or away from their morality. It's a continuing theme that you're going to see me point out in every single society. And this is how societies collapse. And this is how we get to the point of civil war. And so when I talk about the Convention of States and passing a budget that sounds, an amendment that requires a balanced budget, it sounds awesome. But then you have to take it one step further and say, okay, now how is the Congress actually going to do that? And the answer is simply they're not. They're going to get into a huge fight. They're going to legally act against one side or the other. And when that happens, the people who are represented by that one side are going to pick up their weapons, and we're going to be in a civil war. And it's a huge, huge problem. Now, you're probably saying, but wait, I thought you said that you also sort of support the Convention of States. I do, because the entire point of lateralism was to write compromises that can resolve these situations in a way that every party can accept them. Does that mean that I'm going to get current Democrats to accept constitutional carry? Hell no. God himself could speak to the Democrats and they would not accept constitutional carry because they don't care, right? That's the truth of it. Lateralism is not a Republican promoting platform by any means. So I'm not bashing historically Democrats, but I am the current crop that's in there. The team they've got is very much anti-constitutional carry, and that is completely fair to say. And there's no way. And the thing about it is the parties are completely polarized right now. We're sitting right on the edge of a huge conflict. So they just vote one way. I mean, in a simple hearing like the Kavanaugh hearing, I believe there was one Democrat that voted against the party, and I think there was 2 Republicans that voted against the party. And that's out of the entire Congress. I mean, that is just ridiculous. How can you have 600 people that they all only have one opinion or the other? There's a lot of other opinions there. And this is the state of things. And so the federal government right now is completely and absolutely broken. People sometimes say, why don't you, I still try to write laws and bills, still try to write bills and I still try to stay active in the federal political scene. I do in the state as well, but the bottom line is it doesn't matter what you send to the federal government. It's broken. It cannot be fixed through means that involve them fixing themselves because they're too polarized. And so this is where a convention comes in handy. And so I've written lateralism. I've actually written ways so that you can balance the budget. If you follow the guidelines, the economic parameters I've set out about the defense, the military strategy, basic income, welfare, you would balance the budget. You would actually make money. All right. So they want to call a convention and they want to implement the methods under lateralism. They will actually succeed in passing a balanced budget amendment, in my opinion, because it'll lay out all the restrictions and guidelines on how to do that. As it stands, the Convention of States doesn't have that. I've tried to talk to them on several accounts, and they're not open to an actual conversation about how to accomplish these things. I don't know if they just do it for the money and it's just a gimmick. It doesn't sound that way. So, I don't know. I'm going to keep following it and see, but as it stands, they sound like a lot of people. They talk a lot of talk, but they don't seem to walk the walk. They've had mock conventions where everybody there sort of wanted the same thing, and they were just play acting. And even then, they couldn't come to a decision about what would be a good amendments to add, which is ridiculous. But they seem to have this idea that, if they call a convention, the delegates that are sent will all be of one mindset. They sure as hell will not. If they call a convention, what will happen is you'll have exactly what you have in Congress. And that you'll have half the convention will be super conservative, if you want to call it that, or we'll say super Republican, and then you'll have half the commissioners super Democrat. And that's the truth. And they'll just argue about everything, and in the end, they would resolve nothing. And even if they did, they would put amendments forth that the states would quickly would not ratify. And so you don't get 38 states to ratify something, it doesn't become an amendment. And so that's why they shop for ones that are simple. So like I said, Democrats and Republicans both, the people that are voting are willing to support term limits on Congress. And the thing about it is the states are willing to do that as well. The people and the states would both be willing to pass the Balanced Budget Act. But it's a trap. It's dangerous. And so that's why I try to stay involved, because if they do succeed in getting this convention called and they put forward just what they're saying they put forward, and it went through the convention and everybody accepted it, which they might, the states might ratify it and we might find ourselves in a civil war before you can blink. And it's ironic because one of the selling points that they have about the convention is to avoid civil war, and yet they want to put forth an amendment that I feel like would probably cause just that to happen. So I wanted to bring that up in my podcast. Okay, so that's my Supreme Court Justice / Convention of States talk for today. Now, I was going to read some questions out because, like I said, it's funny. I got a lot of mail messages and emails and stuff about sort of questions about lateralism, but no, they don't put them on the website. And by the way, I need help on the website. It's really terrible, but I need to get in there and really make a legitimate website, not a WordPress blog. Anyways, people ask questions, some personal. I don't really care about that's fine. I'll answer whatever. But so I'm just going to go through. I'm going to have to look a few of them up, but I've got some here on a notepad that I took down. It says, are lateralists conservative or liberal? They would be both. I think that it's more of a conservative ideology, sort of. I don't like to use the word conservative in this because conservative is a moving goalpost. As I said, every time you compromise, you move to the left. Well, conservatives go with it, right? So conservatives are only more to the right than a moderate socialist or a liberal, right? So, like, if you take a conservative from 60 years ago, they're way over here on the right, but if you take a conservative from right now, you compare them. This conservative would be a long way. Today's conservatives would be a lot more liberal than the ones from 60 years ago. And so, I would say that ideologically, lateralists would be kind of a moral objectivist, like a fundamentalist. They would be like, here's our morality of our society. Let's make decisions sort of, based around that. But the thing about it is that in a lateralist society, the ideology, the moral objectives would be more centered to begin with. And the reason I say all that, I'm not trying to double speak, but for example, basic income. That's just not a concept you associate with sort of conservatism. Maybe when you explain it, why I want to do it, then conservatives might go, "Oh, okay," but the truth is, they probably wouldn't. Look at some would, some wouldn't. If you look at libertarians, for example, I don't think there's any scenario where basic income is acceptable to a libertarian. I just don't. I think that, not the actual ideology. The whole point of sort of, we'll say classical liberalism and sort of the more classical libertarianism is that everybody's responsible for themselves, and it's all about individual things. Well, one of the biggest sayings for libertarians is tax is theft. Well, exactly what they mean by that is redistribution of wealth, and there's no way you can. That's why I say that the basic income is a form of socialism. It is a form of redistribution of wealth. It's like some people can or won't, one of the two, work or aren't succeeding as well as others. And in a perfect world, I wouldn't back that either. Ideally, I would just like everyone to take care of themselves and not, look for someone else for handouts and everything. And then just the people who are, actually handicapped in society or have a disadvantage, a real disadvantage, not an imagined one, then we just help them. They do need help, and we would help them. But the world's moved past that. They don't see it that way anymore. And so, what I do is I look for this Pareto, equation where in all societies, 80% of the wealth has always been held by the upper 20% of society, and so, or the majority of the wealth. And so, what we're looking for in lateralist ideology is we're looking for a split that is acceptable to the populace. So, what I mean by that is if if the bill, so if the average person, the average middle class person, right dead in the center, is making $60,000 a year, and the expenses work out to whatever they work out to, 30,000, then we have to decide: do we find it acceptable that somebody might be making 10,000 a year, and maybe having to work a few jobs just to get by, or do we think maybe that person should have a little push and be able to make it working the base job? And it's a moral question. I mean, you very well might answer no to that question. That they don't deserve your help. But in lateralism, there is a push for being morally accepting of others' failures and trying to help them. And so this is why this is a big part of why we haven't got into the discussion of basic income in a live feed yet, because it's incredibly complex. I didn't just put it in there for no reason. And like I say, it was proposed in the original, the original meetings of the original founding fathers. Thomas Paine put it forward as well, and there's a reason for it. I mean, there is in all societies a reasonable expectation of what the lowest class people are going to have or not have. And if that equality gap is what it's called, I don't agree with the name, but if it gets large enough, it will be problematic, and you'll see a high crime rate. So it actually serves everyone to be aware of that gap and to try to do something about it. And so in modern terms, that's considered a very liberal perspective. I don't actually agree it is a liberal perspective. I think this is part of the polarization in the United States. I think that people look at, politics through black or white lens now, and it's if one side pushes an agenda, an item as an agenda, then the other side's got to be against it. And I think that there has always been, or there always should be, a concern in society about the lowest members, the lowest standing members in society. And I think big reason why America became the United States as it is because of debtors' prison in the United Kingdom. And that was an answer to the lowest class. It's like, they did nothing to help them. And then when they fell behind, because crime always does rise in this situation, I was just mentioned that there's a direct correlation. They threw them in prison. And kind of like we do right now with drug prohibition, we have this whole huge industry of prison, and that's not a positive thing for your society. When you're throwing people in jail for possession or for not being able to possess any item, you've crossed a fundamental road to me that you've now ventured into the area of morally being wrong. And I think that this applies to most anything. And I think it's a really important part about lateralism that I've concluded is that possession has to be viewed in a way. You have to always consider it. It's so like possession of marijuana. You should not be arrested for possession of marijuana. It just doesn't matter. It's just an item. And you say, well, does that mean you're for legalization of pot? I'm pretty indifferent, to be honest with you, but from a legal perspective, yes, I am actually. People say, well, should we tax it? I don't really care. I mean, if you're asking me if I was a congressman, what would I do as a lateralist? I would probably say complete decriminalization of marijuana, and I would say implement a tax on it, because no matter what anybody tells you, if you breathe stuff into your lungs that smoke, it's bad for you. And we currently have a collective medical system where people have to share the burden. So I think it should be taxed, and the tax should be turned around and put into something that's actually productive to society, like paying down the deficit. That's what I would do as a congressman, probably. But I've done a lot of research on the topic, and I would never vote in Congress without knowing exactly what I was talking about. So, like I said, don't have a lot of concern about it, but that's my gut feeling. So, liberal or conservative, which one is lateralist? They're both. you could have a caucus in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party both for lateralism. And that really should be obvious, because the whole point is to come to compromises that work for everyone. It makes sense that if that is actually happening, then you would be able to be either. All right. It's a funny comment just saw. It says, "Is that a gun behind you and a Bible?" Yes and yes. That is a 12-gauge shotgun. That is a bayonet. And that is a Bible. And since somebody asked last week, what are some of the books back here? It's In the Fed by Ron Paul, Revolution by Ron Paul, The Deep State, 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, 5,000 Year Leap, which is an amazing book. And there's another Ron Paul book there. And then there's some books here by Pat Choate. And the reason why a lot of the influence of these books is because Pat Choate was a high school friend of my father's. He ran for vice president with Ross Perot, and he come to the house, during the campaign. So this is when I had just joined the military, so it's going back some time, like say 90. I think it was 94 election or 92. I can't remember what year that election year was. But he came to our house. We sat down. We had long talks about the economy and how to do it, make it better. Like me and Ross Perot did. Ross Perot he's a guy that founded Walmart, or not Walmart, but EDS, and he's good buddies with Sam Walton, who did form Walmart. And these are like economic giants. And so to talk about how to reform the economy with them, in a lot different stance than what I do, because they wanted to sort of reform the economy in the way that would best grow, big business, of course. And I would want to reform the economy in a way so that it works for everybody. But I was young back then, so I didn't have as much, many ideas as I do now. But through having met Ross Perot, I met Ron Paul, and who also ran for president. Did he? I think he did. He might have ran vice president. No, he did run for president, and I remember they ran him out. And I've had a few discussions with him. As he's gotten older and he's got more popular, it's really hard to talk to him. But this is going back to back probably early 2000s, and I don't know. He didn't strike as a sort of an image, a famous character as he did now. He was working in Congress at the time, and he's one of the early sort of libertarians. I mean, he's still a big voice in libertarian beliefs. So there's a lot of ties between me and libertarianism. I'm really active in the libertarian community. In fact, a lot of people don't know I'm running for House of Representatives in Congress as a libertarian, even though I'm actually a lateralist. And the reason I'm doing that is because you can't form an independent party in Texas. It's just, you can, but it's almost impossible. You won't get any backing. And I didn't make the decision soon enough to file. I would have filed as a Republican in this situation. And the main reason is because I wasn't really trying to win. But in Dallas, it's a Democrat stronghold, and they have a lot of just what I view as crazy socialist style ideas. And so I wanted to be in the debates, directly debate the Democrats that are responsible for that. And I got to do that. So that was my point, was to spread the ideology of lateralism. Next election, I think I might run for real, and I don't know which position yet, because I have to see, sort of. There's a lot goes into making a decision like that, and kind of have to analyze it. But probably run as a Republican in the Lateralist caucus. I might create a caucus, so we'll see. Got a little while to think about that. So yeah, anyway, that's the books behind me. Yes, gun, Bible. This is Texas, so I can do what I want. It says, last video you mentioned monastic practices. Does that mean you're a monk? It does, but we're not going to go about that. If you look up the meaning of monk, it's solo. It's a personal thing. Yeah. So when we talk about when I do videos for the Brothers of Legion, I'll talk about that, and that's coming. Which, by the way, also I have some software now to make videos sort of instructional style videos, whiteboard videos, and little animated characters and things. And so I'm just learning how to do that a little bit. As soon as I learn how to control the software better, I'm going to make the videos explaining lateralism. So that's soon. I've been practicing already. I've been doing it, make a few people move around, what have you. A little bit harder than it sounds, but luckily I got it. Hang on. It says, how do you feel about Trump saying Judge, now Justice, Kavanaugh was proven innocent? There's going to be a lot of controversy about that. So Trump's comment is true in the context that he said it. In the context that Justice Kavanaugh was in the middle of a congressional hearing and was accused of sexual assault without any charges being filed, then in that situation, all you need to do is meet the accusation without proof. All you need to do to disprove it is show that there is no proof. So he was, in fact, in the context he was accused, proven innocent. That's a fact. If he would have gone to court, it might have been different. It wouldn't have been, I don't think, but it might have been. So when people say he didn't prove that, well, they're wrong. He did, in fact, prove that he was innocent in the context he was accused. So that's how I feel about that. All right, so it says argument against democracy and socialism is an ethical system. Okay, so what this question, this is from a college professor, by the way. I guess what they're asking is in a democracy, which America is not, and there is no democracies in the entire world, if you were trying to care for the lowest ranked people in society, and you were to give them part of your wages, would that be socialism or would that still be a democracy? I think that's what the question's asking. It would be a socialist concept or program that could be implemented in any government system is the answer. So yes, you could have a socialist basic income in a democracy. In fact, you probably would. No, actually, no, you probably wouldn't, because one of the things about democracy is one of the reasons why it's so dangerous is because it's the rule of majority, or the tyranny of the majority, as a lot of people, tyranny of the many. Most people wouldn't want you taking money from their wages, and they wouldn't care if you were poor and you were starved. So I actually say they wouldn't give you that money. I say that in a democracy, the poor would starve to death, probably. That is the most likely thing that would happen, despite what a lot of people think. So is it ethical? Ethical? I got an N in there, but I think it's supposed to be ethical. That depends on your morals. I don't personally feel like democracy is ever ethical. You don't let the in crowd bully the people who can't defend themselves. That's the whole thing. That's what we've sort of as a society we've progressed to. But it was always a concept. How would a lateralist deal with legalized euthanasia or elective euthanasia? So in a lateralist society, would we allow people to elect to have suicide through the doctor? Depends on the moral code of the society. One of the things about the lateralist system is it doesn't choose the moral system. It just says that there has to be an objective moral society code. So if it were Christian, you'd have to decide from the Christian perspective, would it be right for a doctor to help assist someone in killing themselves? And I think, and this is just an opinion, and I've just thought about it just now, so I feel like two things come into play here. I think in all societies, doctors follow the code of doing no harm. So I would say that they would be violating that oath because they would be doing harm. I think that when you kill somebody, even if they want to die, then I think you've done harm. But I'd have to think on that, really. But the reason I say that is because there could be all kinds of circumstances. If a person was in fact mortally ill and there's beyond any hope, maybe you wouldn't be doing harm in that situation. But I don't know. It's hard because you could always say, well, what if you wait a little while? They might find a cure. So I'm gonna say that the doctor's doing harm, which violates their oath, which they can't do as a doctor and still be allowed to be a doctor. And then the other side of it would be as a Christian, should we allow people to commit suicide? That's complicated because even in the Bible, the question of suicide comes up. Actually, a lot of people don't, overlook that. I think that all individuals should have the personal liberty to make any decision over their own life and death. So I think an individually in any moral code that should be included. I am not positive what I think the Christian perspective on that is. A lot of people would point to the first commandment, which says thou shalt not kill in modern interpretations, but it actually is supposed to say thou shalt not murder, so it wouldn't fall into that. I don't know. I think that it would require a lot of discussion. And then this is the thing about lateralism. It's not just one person make decisions. It's promoting people coming together and talking about things. I feel like in a lateralist society that it would be wrong in the medical practice for the simple fact that it would cause doctors to violate their oath, and it would require that some doctors violate their oath. Because if you passed a law saying that people could get assisted suicide and no doctors were willing to do it, then it's reasonable to assume that the first thing that would happen is some court somewhere would say that the hospital was violating your rights if they didn't aid you. So I'm going to say that's a no in a lateralist society, but it depends on the moral code. Some of these questions they can't be answered straightforward because I have no intention of dictating anyone's morality to them. However, if somebody lives in a society, I completely believe that the morality of that society, which is always today based on a religion, should be upheld and respected by every individual of that society, even if they don't believe in that religion. They should still be aware of it and be respectful to it. So in pretty much all Western countries, that's going to be Christian, and throughout the majority of the Middle East, that's going to be Muslim. So, this is the take. This should be taken into consideration. This is a question from, I don't know, it's just novice. It says, why do libertarians oppose taxation and do lateralists feel the same? So, since I'm often involved in libertarianism, sorry, it's hard to, I can answer both sides of this. So, libertarians feel like redistribution of wealth of any form is theft, and I agree. And the reason for that is because if you take money, so if the government has to raise taxes to pay for something, and then they say to you, you owe this much money. If you refuse to pay that, then they're going to send you a summons to court. And if you refuse to go to court, they're going to send police officers and they're going to arrest you. And so ultimately, tax is enforced by violence of the state, by force. Okay, and so libertarians think all tax is wrong. I don't agree with that stance at all. But the reason why they believe that is because they view all taxation as a form of redistribution of wealth. I, however, do not agree with that. Each person who follows lateralism will have to make their own decision, but I believe that a certain percentage, I believe that when you live in a society, there's an expectation that a certain percentage of what you do is going to go toward bettering your society. I think that is a concept that people believe in, even if they can't vocalize it in that way. So even though you could build roads privately just as well as you can with tax money, examples, infrastructure. You expect there to be an infrastructure. And so, from the latter perspective, it doesn't matter if it happens private or not. It doesn't matter if it's taxes that's done to pay for it, or if it's some form of a private bond just that people create. You're still going to be paying for it. And to me, it doesn't matter who, if you pay a government or not. I understand the libertarian concept that governments waste money and are inefficient, and it would be better to do it privately. That's fine. I mean, I don't oppose the libertarians' concept on that, but as a lateralist, I don't care. And the reason why I don't is because this is a system that's been intended to be universal, and I'm very aware of the way things in Africa, for example, are. There's no private people to come together and form the infrastructure. Can't happen. And so their governments, that's pretty much all they're about, is forming an infrastructure, and they do tend to make it cheaper. I know libertarians find it hard to believe, but they do. And the reason why they do is because they're able to crowdsource, they're able to pull together the individuals. It's a whole different situation. And so in that situation, the taxes, however small they are, actually do help everyone. So I think it can go both ways. I'm not too bothered about it. Anyways, trying to keep it to an hour, maybe less if people want less. Somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour. It'd be nice to know how long people like the show to last. That's it for this week. I'll try to answer questions as they come. Maybe the live stream. Eventually, we'll get some guests on here. We'll talk. It'll go quick. It'll be quicker. But for now, we're going to keep putting along. This is a new podcast, and it'll grow. People will do their thing. Be sure to like and subscribe and let people know. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do next week. I feel like it's too soon to do basic income because I actually want to do the videos first. But we'll see what plays out during the week. And then we'll see what we talk about then. All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night.